Welcome once again, fight fans, DAZN MMA, Sean O'Connell and Dan Hardy. Happy to be with you and very excited. I'm very excited this week because I get to fly across the pond again. This time we're headed to Berlin, Germany, our second PFL Europe event. It feels like Newcastle, Dan Hardy, was a year ago. It's been too long.
It does. It does feel like a long time ago. Fortunately, Atlanta was amazing and that kept us busy. But yeah, for PFL Europe, we've had what feels like a long gap between fights. And after this, I feel like, we're going to be rolling straight into Paris. It's a very exciting week, and the card is, I mean, it's busy from top to bottom. It's hard to pick out a fight that I'm most looking forward to be honest.
Well, before we get into the fights, right? 12 different fights for the Berlin card. Obviously, huge ramifications for all these fighters as they look to move on to the playoffs in PFL Europe, chasing a $100,000 PFL Europe championship. And then, of course, the real carrot, in my opinion, that's dangling at the end of this stick is the idea that if you could win PFL Europe, maybe you get invited to the PFL Global season. And in 2024, you're chasing a $1 million PFL championship. Because as we have seen with our PFL regular season, everything is wide open. I mean, you could not have penciled in the final playoff brackets. There's guys' names, relative unknowns, who have just fought their way. And that's, of course, the promise of the PFL format. Doesn't matter if your name is recognizable. As long as you win your fights, you get to move on. So before we get to these 12 fights, Dan Hardy, president of PFL Europe Fighter Operations, you get to play. You wear the dual hats here, right? You're going to be on the commentary desk with me, but you're also the guy handling phone calls, dealing with these fight camps, dealing with these fighters as they experience the same anxieties and issues that you and I dealt with during our careers. What's it been like as this event, we're days away now, you ramp up dealing with all that stuff?
Every day is a school day. Let me put it that way. Every day there's a new challenge. There's something I'd not anticipated. There's a problem arising that I'd not foreseen. This is what makes the global team so good. When I came over to Atlanta, it was a real eye opener how smooth everything was and how organized everything was. And then I think back to how disorganized I am in my own brain. It's just they're just chaotic events no matter what's going on, and then you put into the mix 24 fighters all with their own lives and their own challenges going on, anxiety as you talked about. They're all managing their weight on their way down, usually almost always down to a weight class. It's interesting to be on this side of it. I mean, I've played a few roles, and obviously I've fought and I've commentated as you have, and this is a different view entirely. And all of the meetings that go on as well, back and forth, the organizational stuff, the things that you don't consider, talking to the commission and making sure that everything's in place for the fighter's safety and the medicals. It's it's a great learning experience for me, and it's something I feel like just with fighting, I'll pick up a couple of losses along the way, but I'll keep trucking and keep my chin up, and well, maybe not keep my chin up, but keep enthusiastic and get better each time. Yeah.
Enough about Dan Hardy and his role as president of fighter operations in Europe. Let's talk about the 12 fights we have for PFL Europe Berlin. I'm really pumped about our main event, our co-main event, a couple of guys earlier on the card as well. Can we start the conversation with Lewis McGrillen? We saw him in Newcastle. This kid was described to me as an absolute madman. The word feral was thrown around, which I love because it's not an adjective we use often in the United States. And then, of course, the fan base and Lou both delivered. Everyone in Newcastle showed up, were incredibly loud, and he got the knockout that he promised us he would. Well, Lewis McGrillen is back, and it seems like incrementally, as you should in your pro career, stepping up the level of competition.
Yeah, that's very fair to say. Amrali is no pushover at all. He is a very, very tough stalwart of a fighter, is my favorite word to use about him. He's not going to be bullied or pushed around. He's going to stand there and he's going to take shots to give shots. And for someone like McGrillen, who of course as an amateur was a good wrestler, ground and pound fighter, has now developed as a pro into this, one punch knockout artist. Like Kulikan was determined in that fight, but as soon as he stepped in there with McGrillen, it's almost like McGrillen's presence took over the smart cage. And I can only liken it to one performance, and it's a little bit cliche, but when I was octagon side when McGregor fought Brandao in Dublin, and he just, as soon as he stepped into the cage, you just felt like he was in total control. That's what it felt like, and it's special because we don't feel it very often, especially sitting cage side. It's something that we recognize when it's in front of us, and I feel like his performance spoke volumes. But at the same time, he's signed onto the PFL roster now. We need to see what his potential is, and the guy in front of him is going to stand his ground. He's going to be able to wrestle. He's going to be able to trade punch for punch, or at least as far as we know. I mean, McGrillen will tell you otherwise, of course, and we'll be hearing all about it during fight week. But I'm excited for this. It's a tough test for a young man, and if he proves that he's ready, then he's going to be looking at the bantamweight bracket next year for the $100,000 running, I think.
Yeah, Emrali Sadosharov from Tajikistan. And look, you don't want to make assumptions and generalize when it comes to fighter populations, but if they come from a place that ends in Stan, a lot of times they grew up wrestling. And this is a guy who's going to probably try and use that physicality, but he also is a knockout artist, right? So that leads to, I think, an excellent matchup for the fans. Lewis McGrillen is back. At some point in his career, whether it's now or later, he is going to be appointment viewing for a lot of MMA fans. For some, he already is. Hopefully, we get an opportunity to really introduce him to a larger worldwide audience. But it's up to him. He's got to keep winning. He's got to keep fighting the way that he's been fighting. And I've been impressed with him so far. As crazy as he is, he definitely has the fight game dialed in. Well, the other great thing about it, right, we've already mentioned a couple of the bantamweights, but we do not have men's bantamweights on the global roster. And so the idea that we've got this in PFL Europe, it's a new weight class for us to call. The action obviously is a little bit different when you're talking about those even lighter than featherweights, right? And that brings me to a matchup I'm very much looking forward to for multiple reasons. The Black Mamba, Franz Malambo, and Rashid Haas. Malambo by himself, interesting. Haas by himself, very interesting. The matchup between them is incredible. Let's start with that, and then I'll tell you what else I'm excited about with the Black Mamba.
Sure. Well, I mean, the fight, of course, and the circumstance as well, interesting because, of course, Malambo was training to fight a rematch with Don Woodin, someone who he's already got a win over. And then, Woodin, an accidental clash of heads in training's taking him out with an injury, and Rashid has stepped in. But it's not short notice because he was our alternate anyway. Like, he already had tickets booked to come out to Berlin to step on the scales and be ready in case someone, didn't arrive, at fight week prepared to fight or ready or able to. He's got a week notice now instead of a day's notice, and he knows who he's fighting. So straight away, these guys have got like a week to focus on one another, figure out what they're capable of. Malambo is a very interesting and difficult person to deal with. He's tall, he's rangy, he's got a wicked striking skill set that's very, very fluid. I mean, you've got to think he's been at SBG all the way through the Conor Chaos. That's been his home gym. John Kavanagh in his ear all the time, crafting him as a fighter. His ground game is super slick as well. And then, of course, Rashid Haas ties people in knots. Has got the same kind of chaos on the feet, confident striking. Often has fought in a small cage as well all the way through his career. So he's ready for a close range battle. And it's one of the bantamweight fights that could just swing either way. We really don't know who we're going to end up with in Paris. And I'm excited to just kind of watch these fights play out in front of us.
Well, you just mentioned one of the things that makes Malambo so interesting to me. An SBG student, like an OG SBG student, not named Conor McGregor, right? We're seeing a couple of these guys now forging their own paths, striking out on their own. Nathan Kelly, Franz Malambo. Obviously, Johnny Walker has represented that gym pretty well at the UFC level. But any gym, you cannot be a one-trick pony. You cannot be, the Ronda Rousey situation with Tavernian. Like, we know that Kavanagh has a particular style and coaching skill set, and Now we get to see him imparting that on people who are not Conor McGregor, who are emerging on the global stage. That to me is very fascinating and very interesting, right? Because we know that Conor by himself, this global phenomenon, and saying, I'm Franz Malambo, I was a Conor McGregor training partner, that's great. That's going to get you a little bit of attention. But when the cage door closes, that doesn't matter anymore, right? Maybe people will talk about you and tune in to watch you a little bit more because you're guilty by association. But now it becomes who you are, how you represent that gym, and what that gym means on the global stage in mixed martial arts. That's why I love seeing these guys in PFL Europe and in the PFL global season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you're right. I mean, Malambo's been there for a long time, and people often, forget the other fighters that have come through SBG. You look at the McGregor Brandao fight card, and we had some great fights all the way down there with the likes of Paddy Houlihan and other fighters that have been trained by John Kavanagh. He's old school. He's been around for a long time, and it's always interesting to remember that you see McGregor in these huge fights where there's just such a buzz around the event, and then at the end of the night McGregor goes off and people follow him and the cameras swarm to wherever he's at, and John Kavanagh gets on a flight and goes back, and on Monday morning he's back in the gym working with his fighters. And it's like, you can imagine what it's like for him. It's like 1 minute he's cornering a world title fight, or he's there cornering Conor McGregor against Floyd Mayweather in Vegas, and then the next day he's back on the mats with the likes of Franz Malambo, working and crafting their skills. He's taking those high level, those I mean, don't want to sound too way out here, but he's taking those high level vibrations that Conor's putting out, and he's bringing them back onto the mat, and that is resonating through all of those guys. Like, that whole gym was packed for as soon as McGregor became a thing. But at the same time, you've still got that hardcore that were there in the process of him becoming Conor McGregor, and Malambo is one of those guys. Just like Gunnar Nelson. And interestingly, Gunnar Nelson from Iceland comes over to to Dublin to train. Malambo moved to Ireland to train. They've both picked up a really, really strong Irish accent as well. That's how you know how long he's been there.
Very much looking forward to the Black Mamba and Rashid Haas, who doesn't have the same kind of pressure that Malambo has, right? Because Malambo comes in with a little bit of hype, with a little recognition, thought he was fighting Dom Wooding, as you mentioned, expected to beat him again. And now you got this guy stepping in. It's just like, no one except me thinks I'm going to win this fight. I love those situations in the sport of mixed martial arts. All right. This fight was supposed to happen in Newcastle, right? As we're figuring out our women's bracket, Lorena Cabero and Riet Ikut, they were supposed to fight, or at least Riet was supposed to fight in Newcastle, as you had to deal with. People fall out, stuff happens. Now she gets this opportunity to fight not the co-main, but the fight before the co-main in Berlin, and of course try to punch her ticket through to Paris, which makes for a shorter turnaround than the other women. So something that's an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Gret was supposed to fight Mafalda Carmona, who came in overweight to a point where, the fight didn't go ahead. And, as unfortunate as that was, Gret got to sit back that night and watch the other fights take place and kind of get a measure on the division. Like, she, of course, she's got less time between now and Paris, but it's much easier to get ready for a fight and then just stay in the gym and just get through the rest of the season. A longer season, as you will know better than me, will be more exhausting. So, to be able to sit and watch those fights in Newcastle and then go away and prepare like that's the standard I'm raising myself to, I think we're going to get a better version of Gret in Berlin than she would have been in Newcastle. And, opposite her, she's got a fresh replacement and a really exciting young fighter, only 18, 3-0. She's done her whole career on GMC in Germany. So she's driving to the venue. She's going to be very comfortable. But of course, she's going to be bringing fans with her that are going to witness her make her PFL debut. And a big opportunity for her. I mean, imagine winning $100,000 if you were, 18 years old. it would set you up for the rest of your training camps for 2024. And, you know, she could have a second run at the same thing. It's a really good opportunity for her. And I feel like she's going to, you know, raise her game to this level. She jumped at the opportunity. I was looking at just matching her on the card in another bout, to be honest. But when she realized that the fight was open, she, you know, her manager contacted me straight away. She's very confident, very enthusiastic. And, you know, she's coming in with a crowd to entertain, expecting her to be the one putting on a show. That's why I've put them in that place on the card, the Coco main event. It's like the celebratory position on the card where everyone in the arena can get excited because there's something special about to happen.
I will beat this dead horse every time we talk about a young fighter with a ton of potential, but the idea that someone can be 18 years of age, 20 years of age, and already have pro mixed martial arts experience. I did not walk into an MMA gym until I was 23 years old. Like, the idea that these people already have pro mixed martial arts experience is the evolution of the sport. So an 18-year-old getting out there, putting the undefeated record on the line, especially in front of a home crowd, let's get it. All right, that brings us to the co-main event. Mokhtar Benkassi, he had an opportunity in the PFL before against the guy who's fighting in the main event. And that fight, when you talk about an unsatisfying situation for everyone involved, for us cage side, for all the fans, and of course, most of all for the fighters, when a fight ends via eye poke, there's nothing worse than that, right? You get all dressed up, you get the tuxedo on, you order the limousine, you're ready to go to the prom, and then nothing happens. That's what happened. And I imagine, even though that's in the books last year, said and done, I imagine as he steps into a smart cage again, in the back of Mokhtar's mind, at least.
You've got to think so. I mean, you know, it was a really, really fun fight. I watched it again the other day, and it was like Nutsi had really good moments in it. He kept tagging him with the left hand. He was setting up his high kick beautifully. But then, you know, we had a couple of eye pokes early on, and just at the point where Benkassi was starting to press and kind of turn the action in his direction, the fight was stopped. It's interesting to have the little bit of tension between the two of them going into this because they're not fighting each other immediately. And I think that makes for an interesting storyline through this, you know, because it was their last fight. You know, both of them have gone away with that kind of, you know, annoyance. You know, it's uncomfortable, isn't it, when a fight ends without a conclusion? Whether it's whether the fight doesn't happen. I mean, I had a fight cancelled on the night when I was in the back with my gloves on and my mouth guard in, and that was. I just didn't know what to do with myself. You know what I mean? It was like I had this energy, and I would imagine, and same thing, you know, like fights getting cancelled the week before. You know, you're just left with something that's like unfinished. You know what I mean? And taking that energy back into training camp. Like, I know someone that's been training with Benkassi down at London Shoot Fighters, and he just talks about this intensity that he brings to the mat, and you know. What's interesting about him is, you know, he's got some of the most experienced, he's one of the most experienced fighters on the card, you know, 20 wins and 7 losses. He's kind of towards the end of his career, if you like. You know, he's had a good portion of fights compared to Nutsi, say, who's, you know, 9-1. He's kind of, it's like, I don't know. I feel like we're getting the vintage version of him, like the best version, where he's not really taken a great deal of damage through his career. He's had really good training all the way through, and he's ready just to kind of show everybody that he's the man to beat in the tournament, because people will be looking past him, given the fact that, you know, he's got 7 losses on his record, and there are other guys with 1 loss or less on their record. I think he's going to be a really interesting problem for everybody, and I think, you know, Kershad, he's a slick fighter with a high pressure style. One of these guys is going to break. One of these guys is going to give canvas in front of him, and I don't know which one it's going to be, honestly, because Kershad is tough. He's confident that he's going to be able to get the job done on home soil, representing Germany. He's going to try and push Benkassi around, but Benkassi doesn't go away. He's going to keep pushing back, and I think at some point the tide's going to turn for one of these, and I think we're going to get a spectacular finish. And then, you know, most likely a really, really interesting matchup to come out of this, a face-off in the smart cage on the night, ready for Paris.
I understand why people get excited about undefeated records and 1-loss records. And obviously I mean, I do. I get excited about the young fighters that are up and coming. But there's also something dangerous, something foreboding about an individual who knows, I got maybe 3 years left to do this. I got 2 more seasons in me, or this is my final fight. If you have the right mentality going into a sort of runway approach like that, where hey, there's an end to this journey. Lewis McGrillen isn't considering that right now. Okay. Nobody who's in their 20s is thinking about, I got 27 fights under my belt. Like, people aren't thinking that way. But as you get a little bit older in your career, you get some of that experience. Those losses are all lessons, right? There's something dangerous about fighters who have that level of experience and know that the end is in sight. It's like backing an animal into a corner. I got to do it, and I got to do it now, because this opportunity doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
I'm biased when I say that, because the best fight year of my career was my final year, right? Because I knew. And so I was able to approach training, fights, interviews, everything, knowing like, hey, this window is closing, so I got to give the best version of myself. If Mokhtar is in that realm, even a couple years away from that, that could be very, very fascinating, to me at least.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's how I see him. That's the energy that I get off him, and I feel like, exactly what you said. He's in a position where he knows that it's now or never to roll the dice. It's now or never to take these chances in these fights and show people what he's capable of, give people the best version of himself ever. But then, at the same time, he's got 27 fights wisdom plus all of those training camps to make those decisions a bit smarter and a bit more, well-timed. Like, ultimately, MMA, high-level MMA, is about decision making. It's such a chaotic environment, which is often why I always say it's often why you get heavyweights that are, coming into their best years when they are in their late 30s.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's because, especially at heavyweight, when the fraction of error is so much smaller. Like, you can have 2 bantamweights, lightweights wail on one another, but if you get that at heavyweight, it's because they're both exhausted and no one's got any power left, right? Like, if they start wailing against on one another in the first round, you get fights like Frank Mir against Todd Duffy, or Arlovsky against Travis Brown, where it's just mental for, like, what was the other one? Pat Barry Cheick Kongo. Yeah. It's wild for like as long as it lasts, and then someone's face down asleep. Like, I feel like because the decision making is so important at heavyweight, wisdom pays off. And when it comes to this level, the fight is going to move so fast, it's going to move so quickly, because these guys are bantamweights. Those moments where he's making decisions, that experience is going to pay off. I always think, like, these guys are stepping in there. Of course, they've got their comparable records. One's got 27 fights, one's got 12 fights. But if you take all that aside and take the experience they've got going into the smart cage, there's a lot more quantity and value in the record of 27 fights, regardless of how those fights go. And Ben Casey's always been a name to remember on the scene, and I feel like now we're going to get the vintage years of him, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, or whatever. I think we're going to see the best version of him.
All right, so the main event: Francesco Nuzzi, Farhad Iran Nezad. You brought up the interesting kind of dynamic between Mokhtar Benkasi and Francesco Nuzzi. Those guys want to fight each other again, right? But you can't have one eye on Mokhtar while you're going in to fight Farhad Iran Nezad. You can't. That guy will make you pay if you're Nuzzi and you're not fully focused on this main event fight.
100%. He's a powerhouse. He's got good Greco. He's got a good body lock wrestling style. Makes him very difficult to take down. Anytime someone takes him down, it's so difficult to control him. He's able to just bridge with. Honestly, I don't know where he generates his power from. It's like, as long as he's got a toe connected to the canvas, he can bridge and throw you off. He's going to be really problematic for Nuzzi, and he's going to have a big following there. He's got the biggest social media following on the card. I think there's going to be a lot of noise when he's walking out. And, he's going to be confident that Nuzzi's potentially looking past him, because, he's got his eyes on maybe getting that rematch with Ben Casey. Like, this is these guys in a lot of ways are going to look like mirror images of one another when they first start out. But Farhad will slowly take the canvas away from you if you keep backing up. And then he's got to watch out for the counter striking of Nutsi. You know, what we saw against Ben Casey, using that left hand to set up the high kick, throwing the high kick, following it with the left hand. You know, those patterns are difficult to judge. But at the same time, you know, if Farbod starts to get you know, if he starts to get hit and lit up with those long range shots of Nutsi, then he might want to close distance. And then you've got to deal with the guy that's got good grappling skills as well. You know, I feel like Farbod can hang on the feet because he's got the power to do it. But if he's kept on the outside, Nutsi's going to feel like a much taller fighter. But you know, a good crowd and a lot of noise can get you through that danger zone very quickly and get hands on chins. So you can't underestimate someone that's going to be representing their home gym, Spitfire in Berlin.
12 great fights. We touched on, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them. The whole card is going to be interesting. The whole card is going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, we'll be on DAZN. PFL Europe, the most important kind of overarching theme here for me is what these fighters have in front of them, not just with the $100,000 prize, but an actual path to eventual global stardom if they can fight their way to it, right? When you start out in your career, when you're halfway through your career, even if you're nearing the end of your career, it's not always a situation where you've got the steps in front of you like, okay, I win this fight, I get the call from the PFL, I get the call from the UFC, I get the call from whoever. That's all I need to do. Okay, now I did that. Now I got to beat this guy and maybe beat the next 2, and then I can call out whoever I want. You take away the guesswork with this. That's what's so special about PFL Europe, right? All of these individuals in a talent-rich region that has not had the same opportunity, quite frankly, as a lot of American fighters have had, now have a direct path to the PFL global season if they can seize the opportunity. So they've got fights in front of them for Berlin. And then if things go well in Paris and Dublin, and beyond that, the world is the oyster. I love that the PFL has changed the game this way.